Ladies and gentlemen, you are with Corridor 8 podcast with the series Greg Chachoff, Alive in the MPO. Mr. Chachoff is a long-time member of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization and president of the MPO Freedom Chapter in Columbus, Ohio. His family has been involved with the MPO for generations, and he has been a direct witness and participant in the history of the organization for decades. His memories and personal impressions are an exceptional source of information about the development and processes in this remarkable organization of the Macedonian Bulgarians in the United States and Canada and their struggle for freedom, human rights and Macedonia for all Macedonians, regardless of their nationality or religion. Today's topic is MPO's evolution and transformation since 1950s. How did it feel to be part of the MPO's conventions then, and how does it feel now? Mr. Chachoff, it is our pleasure to have you in this episode of Corridor 8 again.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
This has been fun. This has been really enjoyable. I hope we can do a good job today.
Hopefully. We already started doing a great job, and I would like to ask you, what do you remember from the times when you were a young child and you had your first conventions? When is your first MPO convention? As far as I can recall, it was somewhere in Cincinnati.
Yeah, my first convention, I was 5 years old. It was in Cincinnati. And what I remember the most, two things, so many people. I had never seen so many people in one place ever. That was the first time that I'd been, part of the big crowd. And just the fact that it was really loud. I mean, the music and the people, everybody was having a great time. My first impression of the convention was at a dance. It was probably the Sunday or Monday night dance. And to be in that ballroom with probably 900, 1,000 people. I don't know what the room held. I think it was about 1,000 people. So yeah, it was overwhelming for a 5-year-old. And, it was a lasting memory. I mean, I definitely remember it. And I can see it now. A lot of people. Then the first convention that I really remember, though, was when I went with my Baba and Dedo and my Teta. We went to the convention in Detroit in 1964, and we talked about this in the first episode. That was truly an amazing experience. So, yeah.
That was the meeting with Nixon, or?
No, with Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson
was at that convention, and he was running for re-election, and he happened to have a event scheduled in Detroit that weekend, and so he came to the convention, he and his wife. It was pretty wild. And, so here I am, my first real convention. I was 5 years old before. So we got the convention, I'm meeting people, and the president of the United States. So, yeah, a lot was going on.
Okay. We have a document written by Mr. Kolyanov. And as far as I know, he's part of your extended family. We are your relatives. Yes.
That was my mother's father.
So your grandfather. Yeah. So this is official document of MPO since August 27th, 1941. So Mr. Kulyanov, your grandfather, wrote here that the delegate of the organization for the Congress in Indianapolis, Indiana, will be Mr. Todor Vasilev. This document is written in Bulgarian, and I just wonder, what was the official language of the conventions usually?
It was Bulgarian.
Always it was Bulgarian.
There was very little English spoken at the meetings, and that didn't change until sometime in the 70s. But yeah, everything was in Bulgarian. And even when we would have like the local meetings in Cincinnati, the Bistrica, most of the most of the conversations were Punashi. And but I can remember my father telling everybody, look, you people, we need to speak English.
Mm.
This is America now. We need to use English as much as we can. So some people spoke English, some Punashi, but most of it was in Punashi.
Yeah. And do you remember the structures of the conventions? What was the usual structure and order of all activities, rituals? When was the most important part of the convention? How did it continued through the days?
Right.
It was
Now,
3 days, as far as I remember.
no, it
Usually.
was in those days, it was a lot more.
Oh,
And in my first conventions, the one in 1964, then we had one in Cincinnati. I believe it was, gosh, I can't even remember. I think it was 68. And those conventions, the first day of the convention was Saturday. People started arriving on Friday, some, but most of the people got there on Saturday. And during the day on Saturday, the credentials committee would meet and the delegates would present their credentials, and people would confer, people who were assigned on the credentials committee would meet and they would okay the credentials. Yeah, this is valid, this person's a delegate. During that time, people are checking in, they're getting into their rooms, and that night was the first dance. So people were getting ready for the dance. And I can remember it was a big deal for us to go out to dinner on Saturday. But on Saturday night, at the same time, you had two things going on. The dance, obviously, that would start about 8 or 9 o'clock. But around the same time, usually, I think it would have been around 7 or 8, they had the first meeting, but it was a very informal meeting. And I, I was young. I was not at the convention for convention business. I was there to have a good time. But I was also old enough to realize what was going on. That particular meeting on Saturday night, I can remember just peeking in the room and I'd see like the central committee was sitting up at the front of the room. The president of the central committee was at a microphone. In addition to the central committee, I think the Vladika was usually up there. The bishop was up there as well. And they had the chairs arranged so that the people were sitting and, looking at the front of the room. Any MPO member could ask any question of the central committee. So that first meeting on Saturday night was like an open forum, gave people the opportunity to, maybe they saw something in the Tribune. Maybe they had an idea or they had a question. It gave people an opportunity to just speak freely to the leadership of the organization. I honestly don't remember much of what happened until 1978. I think it was 78. Maybe it was 77. I can't remember. The convention was in Toronto.
okay.
And my wife and I got married in 76. So it would have been, I think it was 77. We went to the convention and I was going to be the delegate from Cincinnati. So that was the first time that I was a delegate. So I go to the Saturday night meeting and, basically that's what it was. People were asking questions of the central committee. And I can't specifically remember the question or who asked it because, again, there was that language barrier. Some was in English, some was not in it, was in Bulgarian. And so I was having a tough time processing everything. But all of a sudden, this one gentleman asked a question, not in English. The president of the MPO at the time was Dr. Chachoff. And whatever the question was, the leadership of the central committee were talking amongst themselves with Dr. Isakoff, with the bishop. Then all of a sudden, Dr. Isakoff says, okay, hi there. Meeting's over. Let's go home. We're finished. And they stopped the meeting. So evidently they didn't want to answer this question or they didn't want to discuss it. So they stopped the meeting. And honestly, I can't remember going forward if they ever had that type of meeting again. That might have been the last time that they had that very informal Saturday night meeting, because shortly after that, well, let me back up because you were asking about the format of the convention. So Saturday night was that open forum. On Sunday morning was church services. And I remember my first convention in 64, my Baba took me to the church services, and all of the priests from the MPO supported churches and the Vladika were performing church. After that, it maybe about 1:00, I would say it was about 1:00, they had the first formal meeting. And at that meeting, I can remember the Central Committee would officially resign. They were there as delegates, just like everyone else. And there was a convention chairman who was appointed. And for many of the years that I was delegate, the convention chairman was Otets Nikolov from Detroit. He would preside over the convention. And so the convention business would start on Sunday afternoon. And it was a very long meeting that usually there was usually a break for lunch, maybe about 2 or 3. And then about 4 or 5, it would finish up. But during that meeting, there were 2 major events that took place. The reading of the letter from Ivan Mikhailov, and the Central Committee would present its annual report. So those 2 things occupied the meeting on Sunday afternoon. So after that meeting, everybody's going to go back. You're going to change, get ready for the banquet. The banquet was Sunday night, followed by the Sunday night dance. And honestly, as a young person, I didn't want to go to the banquet. I just, looking back on it now, I wish I would have. But that first year I went, I was with my Bob and Dad when we went to the banquet. Again, what do I remember about that? So many people. The room was just packed. But going forward after that, I never went to the banquet again until maybe the late 70s, early 80s. My mother and father would go, and my brothers and I, David and Nas, we would go get ourselves something to eat. And we would either get room service or eat at the hotel restaurant and get ready for the dance. So there was a big dance on Sunday night. It usually started as the banquet was ending. And so like we'd be in the dance and we'd see people coming back from the banquet. And then on Monday, that first meeting started at 9:00 Monday morning, and it would last almost the entire day. Again, at my very first convention, Monday night, there was a dance. So they'd try to finish up the meeting by, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock so people could eat and get ready for the dance. And then again, this was in the earlier conventions, they would actually have the final meeting on Tuesday morning, and usually late morning, at the latest early afternoon, they would adjourn the meeting. That format basically stayed in place until maybe the early 70s. And then things gradually started changing. The Monday night dance was eliminated. The meetings finished up on Mondays. I can remember we would usually be there until 4 or 5 o'clock and then have to drive back home Monday. And then by the time we get into the 80s, the format that we are using now is what was established at some point in the 80s, where everything is done on one day. Now there's a very small dance, kind of like a very informal, casual dance on Friday night for the people who are getting there early. The delegate meeting starts about 9:30 on Saturday. Usually it's over anywhere between 11:30 and 1. And then we try to have workshops during the afternoon. On Saturday, there's a dance Saturday night. Sunday, we've had some conventions where we do have events taking place on Sunday afternoon. There have been dances. Some places there have been boat rides on Sunday afternoon, or events outdoors. And then last year we had a couple of workshops on a Sunday afternoon that were really nice. Then, of course, the banquet is Sunday evening, followed by the Sunday night dance, and boom, Monday morning, everybody goes home. So, to kind of put a big circle around this, and it 50s, 60s, early 70s, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday morning. As we got into the 70s, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Now we are at Friday evening, Saturday, Sunday. And so it's changed. And I think that format has changed for a couple of reasons. In the earlier days, there was a lot to discuss. There were a lot of things going on. And the people that were active and leading the MPO, well, a lot of those people were there from the beginning of the MPO. So that was their way of doing business that they had become accustomed to. And I'm sure there was a lot to talk about, and there was a lot to consider, a lot of things to do. One thing I do want to point out, two major differences I mentioned how with that original format, the Central Committee operated from year to year, and they would essentially, resign at the start of the convention the following year. At the end of the convention meeting, that's when they would elect the new Central Committee. And the way they did it was kind of interesting. People would create a list or a slate. And so like the convention chairman, he would say, "Koji ima lista za centralni komite." So somebody would propose a list and they'd read the names. Ima drugi listi. Some years there might be other lists, other years there might not. So what people were voting on was that entire slate. I can remember the convention where was this? Doesn't matter. I think it might have been Chicago in 1973. My father was on two lists. It was like, so he had to designate which list he wanted to be with. And it was kind of unusual. Anyway, when Ivan Labamov became president, there was a change of the bylaws where the Central Committee served for 3 years. And so we're kind of using that format now. You could be elected for 2 3-year terms. And then before you were able to get back on the Central Committee, I think you had to wait a year of not being on the Central Committee if you wanted to run for it. So now, and from the changes made during Ivan Labamov's time, they moved away from the list where it was more the individual. And then the Central Committee would select the officers from, in their very first meeting. Kind of interesting. Another thing they had at the time in the 60s and 70s, they had alternates. They had 2 members of the Central Committee who were designated as alternates. And what that meant was they would be there. They would participate occasionally. They couldn't vote, but if one of the members of the Central Committee left the Central Committee, then one of the alternates would get elevated to it. It was an interesting process. I kind of like the way we have it now. And the way we have it now with, I think there's 3 people every year. So you've got new blood every year, and it keeps things fresh. I went on for a long time. I apologize. Good.
It's okay. It's very interesting story. And I think when the things started changing, you mentioned Dr. Isakov, how this process impacted the membership of the MPO in time.
That's a really good question, and I wish I knew the answer. It didn't impact me at all. I just thought it was strange. And but I also remember that, like, our membership is dwindling. Maybe there isn't a need for that open forum. And so I didn't, honestly, I didn't care one way or another whether they had that open forum on Saturday night or not. Why didn't I care? Because I was too young. I didn't know. Looking back on it now, I think it was a fabulous idea. I think it was really awesome to allow anybody to ask any question they wanted of the Central Committee. You're leading our organization. I have this question. You should have a chance. And you got to remember, when the MPO was founded in the 20s, through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, there wasn't the communication, the ability to communicate, like, of course, like we have now. I mean, for crying out loud, I'm in Columbus, Ohio. You're in Bulgaria, and we're talking like we're in the same room.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that then. People had to wait. They either had to write a letter or make a phone call. So having that open forum on Saturday night gave people the opportunity to ask those questions and to find out, what did you really mean by that article in the Tribune? Why didn't this happen? How come the MPO hasn't responded to this? On and on and on and on. And now, if I've got a question, I can get on Facebook or Messenger or pick up the phone or send a text to Nick Stefanoff and say, hey, what's this I hear? They didn't have that ability then. So as we evolved in our methods of communication, that Saturday night meeting wasn't necessary. But still, I think it's a pretty cool idea that everybody was together and could say whatever they wanted. So I don't know if Dr. Chachoff was being forward thinking at the time. I don't think he was. I think what he was thinking is, we're undergoing some changes now. We can avoid a lot of problems by not having this meeting. That's my opinion. And yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's really interesting, actually, to compare the leadership approach. So you witnessed the work of many leaders,
right?
And when you look back, the members of the Central Committee, the presidents of the MPO, what do you recollect from their approach as leaders of the organization? How they explained their ideas about the organization, how they communicated their ideas, their level of leadership skills, maybe, or
that's a very good question. No, that's really a good question. As I think about that, going back to our first session, I started becoming aware of the situation our people have been living with, particularly the immigrants. And by that, I mean my grandparents. I spent a lot of time talking about that. And I started becoming aware of what the Macedonian question was, how it was relating, into the world at that time, earlier, the influences, what made these people immigrate, some of the things that happened that just shaped lives for generations. So that moment for me occurred in the early 70s. And I can remember that that convention in Cincinnati in 1972. Again, I was 20 years old. I was going to conventions to have a good time. That was, for me, that was, at that moment in time, I'm not going to lie, that was just something we looked forward to all year. I'd met a lot of people. So I would have that chance to see friends from Fort Wayne, Toronto, Detroit, Cleveland, Akron, all over. So that's what I was looking forward to most. And also in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I'm going to find the future Mrs. Greg Chachoff. Anyway, I remember at that Cincinnati convention, Sunday afternoon, there was nothing for me to do. I wasn't doing anything. I was just kind of wandering around the hotel, walking around, running into people. And I went into the meeting, and I, just to see my father and find out how things are going. And I went in there, and it was, first of all, the room was packed. Could not find a place to sit down. I was standing up in the doorway watching, and the tone was very, very serious. And I'm looking around, and I went up to my dad, and I'm like, "So everything okay? What's going on?" And he just told me to shush, go away. What I saw, was the passion. I saw so much love for the MPO in that room. And I'm like, all of these people are focusing. And I think it was Petarasov that was talking at the time. I don't remember. It probably was. But everybody was intent on what he was saying. It was not in English, so I don't know what was going on. I kind of know what they were talking about at the time, but that's irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make right now. At that moment, I realized how much the MPO meant to every one of the people in that room, the delegates, the leadership, the people in the audience, the people standing around me. I'm like, okay. So that moment is when I started trying to get involved, learn a little bit more. I started asking questions, and yeah. And then by 1977, I was the delegate from Bistrica, and I was like, wow, this is different. And so from that moment on, every time I went to the convention, I was usually either the delegate from Bistrica, or when we started MPO Freedom here in Columbus, it would either be myself or my wife Janice, or one of the girls at Sana or Angie have both been delegates. And so yeah, but we became involved, and we started participating, and I started participating, and I started paying attention. And so as I saw that shift, and we've kind of talked about this, what the reasons were, I don't know. But you see membership decline, and you see discussions at the meetings becoming shorter and shorter. And I'm just really happy, though, that I got to be a part of it, that I was a part of the Central Committee 2 occasions, in the late 80s, early 90s, and then again, in the last 10 years. And just participating and being a part of that, and making sure that the organization is continuing. But for me, it all stems back to those impressions as a little kid, and then walking into that meeting in Cincinnati and just realizing this is serious business. This is important business. And I'm really glad, for the sake of all the people that were in that room, and for the sake of my grandparents and my parents, that we've been able to keep the MPO going. And and hopefully we will.
And what were the core positions of the MPO on the Macedonian question during the 60s, 70s? You mentioned the convention in 1972. So I found this piece of paper about the convention. As far as I know, this is from 1972.
Yeah.
And here is something crucial thing about the MPO. First of all, a lot of Chachoffs in
yes, Chachovi.
Yeah, and also at the moment it was 50 years ago, 53 years ago, Ivan Mikhailov's motto, Free and Independent Macedonia, a Switzerland of the Balkans. It's written down here.
Right.
So that was one of the most important positions of the MPO. And here is one more. We want our Bulgarian language, schools, and churches restored in Macedonia. So
Right.
that was the situation. That was the picture in 1972. What else? The conventions, the Central Committee discussed in this period, as you can remember, from what you have heard in your family during the conventions, or reading something. All these key positions of the MPO, of the how the Macedonian question could be resolved in a sustainable way at this time.
I think, well, first of all, let me talk about what you've got on the screen there. That's a page from, it was called the Golden Book. The MPO created that book in 1970, 71, 72 to be similar to the almanac that came out, I think, in 39, 40, I can't remember the exact year. The red almanac that had the MPO symbol with the Statue of Liberty and on the cover. And what people did and organizations did, they bought an ad in this book. And it was celebrating the 50 years of the MPO. And so that was our local organization, MPO Bistrica. And then there was an ad for my mother and father, and for my baba and dedo, and for my aunt and uncle. And what people did is they put either their business name or their address and phone number so that other Nashi could have that contact information. Send a Christmas card. Maybe you're visiting, you call somebody up. So that was the way that people were able to, it was like I don't want to call it a phone book, but it was like a directory of those that were in MPO. And that's what that was created for. At that time, though, I think the focus of the MPO was still very similar to what it was when MPO was created, which was, and we've talked about this, which was to support the efforts to create a free, independent, and united Macedonia, as Ivan Mikhailov said, a Switzerland of the Balkans, a place where everybody could be welcome, be included. You identify as a Macedonian, regardless of how you identify ethnically. You're a Macedonian, and I think that's what the primary goal was of the MPO at the time, of the MPO leadership, was to continue that effort. Additionally, the MPO supported and made sure that the Macedonian Tribune was getting published. And I believe at that time it was still coming out every week. I remember we would get it on Friday. It would come in the mail. Whoa. And it would be anywhere from 4, 6, 8, 10 pages, depending upon what was going on. And most of it was in Bulgarian. Occasionally there'd be a little bit in English. And so, supporting the founding principles of the MPO, supporting the Tribune, and of course, whatever Ivan Mikhailov was asking the people of the MPO to help him with, whether it was supporting him, publishing his memoirs, publishing an article, maybe a pamphlet. So yeah, it was continuing the work, and the work that the MPO was founded on. That's what I think was taking place at that time. Of course, that evolved. And again, we talked about this last week, as people evolve, as one generation moves into the next generations, ideas become different. They change a little bit, and they also become relevant to the moment. That's just natural. It's natural. When the immigrants came in, in the early part of the last century, in the 20s and 30s, 40s, etc., most of them didn't know English, so English wasn't spoken at home. Well, by the time we get to the generation that my mother and father are a part of, and the myself and my brothers are a part of, that was reversed. When I was born, my first language was Punashi. But by the time my brother Nasa was born 3 years later, I was speaking English. So I was a bad influence on Nasa. Nasa didn't get that opportunity to learn our language like I did. My mother and father were speaking to us both in English. So by the time David came along in 1962, everything was in English. And poor David, he didn't have that chance that I had to learn our language the way we did. So that's just our little family. Well, that repeated itself throughout the people that were a part of that of the organization and their family histories. And some had happened earlier. I would imagine in a lot of those instances, it took place, as those of the children of those immigrants went off to fight in World War II. They became a lot more Americanized, at a lot quicker pace. My father was 18 when he joined the Navy in 1944. An 18-year-old, that's a pretty big eye opener. And of course, he wasn't the only one. So when those guys came back from the war, they had that additional influence. So maybe, and this is pure conjecture on my part, maybe that had a big enough influence on them where they weren't going to embrace it the same way that their fathers did. It's only natural. Yes. I remember my wife telling me and my brother-in-law and my mother-in-law about my wife's father. He came from Gyavato in Bitola in the late 30s. And when World War II started, he joined the American Army and he goes back to Europe to fight for the American Army. Can you imagine at that point the impact that had on him being in the American Army? Well, it immediately Americanized him. And from what my wife told me, he told them that's when his English improved. That's when his attitudes changed towards being an American. And, so that event had a big effect on those guys. And then they became the leaders of the MPO. And, so we made the move to English, et cetera, et cetera. And here we are. I think I strayed off topic a little bit, but the MPO was founded by people who were directly involved in the events of the early 1900s. Ilinden, the Hellenization, what was happening in Serbia/Yugoslavia, what the Turks were doing, the Balkan Wars, the results of the Balkan Wars, San Stefano, Treaty of Berlin, that all the other monkey business that took place, I'm trying to remember that, Bucharest or Paris or whatever it might have been, that shaped what took place. And then that made those people say, hi there, let's go. So they come to the US, they go to South America, they go to Canada, they go to Australia. And people like myself are the product of that immigration. And those of us that are holding on to that foundation that we were given, we're the ones that are going to keep MPO going and hopefully pass it on to our next generation. And that's why I'm proud to say my daughter Angela is a member of the Central Committee now. That was a very huge moment for me when she became the member of the Central Committee, because she was taking it one generation more. And I'm extremely happy about that. Thank you, Angie.
Like father, like daughter.
There you go.
You explained it very, very well. Yeah, it was very, very good explanation. And what I also was thinking while I was listening to you was that it was not just a change between the generations. Even in your generation, like you and your younger brother Nasser, there is a difference, because You already spoke English from, let's say, from kindergarten, from the school,
Right.
from the street, even when you,
The street.
especially
Yeah,
you told us, yeah, that you had Jewish friends. So obviously the only language is not Ivrit or Hebrew. It's
that's right.
English in such situations. So even in one generation, there could be differences, like in 2 or 3 or 5 years difference
That's
between
right.
the members of one generation because of the family structure, who was firstborn, who was second or thirdborn,
That's
and there
right.
is a difference in this. I agree with you. It's a very, very interesting observation. Yeah.
But
So
they were all coming here. Those immigrants came here for a better life,
mhm,
and that was part of that. I mean, as a parent, my goal has been to see my children and my grandchildren have a better life than I had,
of
just
course.
as my grandfather and his father and my father, that was their goal as well. That's what everybody wants for their child. They want them to be better off than they were. So it's just progression.
Yeah. If we continue thinking and discussing the conventions of the MPO through the years, we can go to the 80s, and there is it's a newspaper article, and it's called Macedonians Hold Fast to Heritage. It's from 1987, as far as I see it. I
Right.
will make it bigger.
It's from the
So,
Cincinnati Enquirer.
yes, and there is a person who here who is interviewed. It's Mr. Greg Chachoff, at the time 35. So,
Mlat
uh,
Chovik.
so can you tell us more about the context in which this interview was made with you, and what was the importance of this interview and this publication, where it was published? So, it's Three State Magazine. Okay, so August 30. It's just in the eve before the convention.
Correct. It was
Yeah.
the week before the convention. This was, you know, newspapers in the US at that time, those that published on Sunday had a magazine.
Okay.
And in that magazine, they were called feature stories. And a feature story might be about a local event, an individual, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this particular, the Cincinnati Enquirer magazine, the woman who was, I don't know if she was the editor or if she was one of the writers, but my mother knew her. So my mother was telling her that we've got this big convention taking place, Labor Day weekend. You think you could put a piece about it, about our people in the Inquirer? So that's what this article is about. It's kind of like a promotional piece about the MPO, about the convention, about Macedonians, about the Cincinnati community. And, my mother and brother asked me if I was willing to be interviewed about it. So I got a call from the reporter, and, she was asking me a lot of questions. And I think she also spoke to Virginia Nizamoff. She might have spoken with either I think maybe my father and maybe with Ivan Labamov. I'm not sure. But yeah, I
Hmm.
enjoyed doing it. It got me a chance. It gave me a chance to, just to say some things and to just explain who we are and what we're all about. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was nice. I enjoyed participating in it. And honest to goodness, I completely forgot about it until this moment when you just put it up there on the screen. You know,
I'm glad you're pleasantly surprised.
yeah, I
So at
can
the
see
time,
my
yeah,
mother there.
something
Yeah,
that is very nice. What I notice here. you speak about your roots, but also you express, you and your family express this kind of cosmopolitan, international, multi-ethnic attitude of the MPO. And here is the words like, some of my real close friends are Greek Macedonian. We never talk politics. I think it's very important that it was possible, even with the enemy, to have a normal, polite conversation, which is not very, very often happening on our peninsula, unfortunately.
Even now, look at what's happened here in the United States, these past 7-8 years. So yeah, it and there's still, I've still maintained a lot of those friendships.
Yeah.
And we agree to disagree. How's that? I think that's a good way to put it. And
Very good. Yeah.
I noticed the same thing happened like here in Columbus, with my wife. Most of her friends that are of Macedonian descent are from Vardar, Macedonia. Their families, and in some cases themselves, they immigrated while, the Republic of Macedonia was still part of communist Yugoslavia. And so their perspective on our history, as we all know, is different from the perspective that a lot of us, and particularly those of us in the MPO, subscribe to. But can still enjoy being with some of those people, being around them and sharing the commonality of our heritage. It doesn't necessarily require us to agree politically with the argument that's been taking place, since the late 1890s. But if you like pita and you like Zelnik, what's the difference, right? And when you can talk about a pugacha or you can talk about a manja, there's commonality. And when it's time to igri and oro, you get up and I can't dance to the paidushko, but you do a paidushko or you do a gaida.
Yes.
And, we're still the same people. We just view it differently. And so, yeah, that's a good point that you noticed in that piece there. And, and I think it's important for people to understand that for those who are not as devoted to the MPO as me and my family have been, because there's still something for them at the convention. It's a chance to share a few days with people who share the same background. And, it just, you don't want to close the door. You want to open the door and embrace as many people as you can.
I agree with you. There is no need of confrontation. People should be engaged with finding the things that can unite them, the common things. But I wonder something that just came in my mind now when I was reading at the article. Since the beginning, the MPO, just as VMRO, IMRO, were open to all kinds of nationalities. Since the beginning, that was the core of the ideas, that all Macedonians can and should live together regardless of ethnicity or religion. Why most of the other nations or the immigrants who originate from the region of Macedonia did not embrace this idea, especially before the World War II? They were just Vlachs. Even the wife of Ivan Mikhailov, Mencha Karnicheva, she had Vlach origins from Macedonia, especially also Pito Guli, a very famous revolutionary from Ilintana uprising. He was Vlach. So there are some Vlachs who were deeply involved in the revolutionary movement, But the bigger nationalities, like the Greeks, the Albanians. As for the Turks, I think it's understandable, especially during the time of the Ottoman Empire. That was their empire. But for the rest of the Christian peoples, I don't know why they didn't embrace this idea. It was probably the best idea to save the region from wars, from hostilities,
Right.
a century ago and even today. But
You
I don't
know,
know why it happened like this. In America, we can meet, we can talk, we can be friends, but on a political level, like MPO, especially in the beginning, first half of the century, it was Macedonian Political Organization.
right.
Most of the nationalities, other ethnicities, other national identities were not involved in this. I really wonder why they didn't understand
I
the
think,
yeah.
you know, you make a really good point, and that's a fantastic question. And in my opinion, based on my observations, I think so much was motivated by fear or potential repercussions because of what was taking place in the villages in Aegean Macedonia, or what was happening in Vardar Macedonia, where the ideals that the MPO was founded on, which was an extension, we talked about this last week, an extension of what the leadership of Vemiros started. Those ideals, the Greeks, the Serbs / Yugoslavians, and then moving forward, the communists in Bulgaria, the communists in Yugoslavia, they were anti. And I think those people who were still there were afraid, or a lot of them who came here, who had families that still lived back in Macedonia, I think they were afraid to cause problems for them. And I spent a lot of time talking about it. Just when they were forcing people to change, when my family was forced to change from speaking the language that they grew up with to speaking Greek. Well, a lot of that change took place because of the fear of not making the change, which those who didn't want to make the change are the ones that left. The ones that stayed behind, well, what do you have to do? What do you have to do to survive? What do you have to do to keep yourself from being hurt or suffering in some point? You acquiesce, you assimilate. And so as they assimilated over the years, it that original ideal, that way that they acted, the way that they lived their lives kind of evolved into the life that those that were controlling them wanted them to have. And I've tried to be very careful in what I've said, but I think you understand. So those people who chose not to become a part of the MPO, not to embrace the MPO, I think a lot of them, well, I think there's a couple of different factors. One, I live in America now. I live in Canada now. I'm a Canadian. I'm an American. I think there's those people. And then there's those who are like, I don't want my picture in the Tribune. I don't want my name in the Tribuna, because if the Greeks see that and my sister and her family back in the village, it might be a little difficult for them. I heard people say that. We can look back in Tribune issues, from that time. I remember it was usually on page 3, I think. You'd open it up, and that next page, it had all the donations. And Every once in a while, you'd see anonymous, a friend, and people wouldn't put their names. And I think a lot of those people were afraid to put their names. They didn't want to be connected with their relatives, back in Stadikai, as they used to say, back in the old country. And they wanted to make sure that they were protecting them from any possible repercussions. So,
Yeah, it makes sense.
yeah.
Yes. Uh,
In that article right there, there's a picture, the little tiny picture that on at the very beginning of the article, that the person in that picture, what was his first name? Nicholas. His name was
yes.
Nicholas Daniloff, and he was I believe he was a writer he was definitely a writer for the New York Times, and he was imprisoned in the Soviet Union for they accused him of being a spy. Well, of course he wasn't. He was a journalist, and there was a big event, a big issue took place for him to get his freedom. He was the guest speaker at that convention. He spoke at the banquet, and the conventions at that time usually would have somebody like that, a non-Macedonian who spoke about, you know, events related to the Macedonian cause or that the MPO might be interested in. I can remember at other conventions there was a professor who spoke at two conventions in maybe three. His name was oh goodness, come on, Greg, Heinrich Stamler. He was a professor at University of Kansas, and I think his focus was on Balkan studies and linguistics. And he had a couple of pamphlets that were published by the MPO. He was a guest speaker a couple of times. I can remember in Pittsburgh, the former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, was the guest speaker. In Cincinnati, we always had a representative from the Cincinnati local government come and speak. Usually at the beginning, they would address welcoming people to the city. The MPO would do that. And then, moving forward, I can remember other guest speakers that were prominent. I think the convention, I don't know if it was the one in Washington, D.C. in the 90s. We didn't go to that one, but I think, what was her name? The ambassador to the UN from the United States, Jean Kirkpatrick, she might have spoke at the convention. And moving forward at the convention in Toronto, I wrote his name down because I wanted to bring this up. Lupcha Georgievsky from the Republic of Macedonia in 1999. He spoke at the banquet. He was a guest at the convention. And then there were other conventions where, and this was it was a nice idea, and I really enjoyed both times that it happened. Virginia Nazamov spoke at, I think she was the guest speaker at the banquet in Fort Wayne one year, and she spoke about her recollections, because her father, Christo Nazamov, for years involved with the Macedonian Tribune, one of the great leaders of the MPO and the Macedonian Tribune. She spoke about her recollections as a child growing up in that environment. There was a convention, I believe it was in Fort Wayne in the 2000s, where Lou Todorov, who's a professor in Boston, who was born in Macedonia, and he spoke and he gave the history of the MPO, and it was fantastic. I enjoyed hearing that so much. So it was really important at those conventions to have that banquet and bring somebody in, or to, look amongst ourselves and have somebody speak. And so many of these things, I really enjoyed being able to be a part of those and witness those. And that was something else that took place at conventions. This year, I don't think there was a guest speaker, but we had some musicians and dancers from the Detroit area who performed some songs and some dance, and it was really nice. In addition to having the banquet and the gathering, and any recognitions that took place, but to have something not typical, so that we can all be exposed to either other thoughts, other ideas, parts of our history, and in this case, parts of our culture. So, that's something that it's important to remember, that the guests that came to the convention, that we had at the convention, a lot of them were brought there, for a purpose, and that purpose was served well.
And if we look at this photo, what can you tell us about it?
Well, first of all, that was, I believe, in Cincinnati. And the conventions, long time ago, in the 30s and 40s, they had parades, and they might have a band, but all the organizations would carry signs and they'd carry flags. And so this was before we decided to do that in Cincinnati. Very small. It was in the center of downtown Cincinnati. There's a square. This is where we're gathered. Square is called Fountain Square. And so we walked from the hotel to Fountain Square in a parade. And, there were signs made up, and, holding that banner, my mother is standing there. Next to my mother is my sister-in-law, my brother David's wife. I think that's my cousin Donna in the middle. And then my wife Janice on the right. And on the left, the little girl, is my daughter Angie, my middle daughter, Angie, who a big moment for her, right there at the front. And now she's on the Central Committee. We mentioned that a little while ago. There she is as a little girl up front, and I'm going to be in this parade. So yeah,
it's really great historical photo.
Yeah. A lot of Chachoffs there.
Yeah, great, wonderful photo. And a lot of history in it. When I liked very much the idea with guest speakers at the conventions, and when you mentioned Ambassador Georgievsky, I remember him. He visited Bulgaria too. It was in my mind to ask you about the evolution of the relationship between the MPO and the Republic of Macedonia, nowadays Republic of North Macedonia, and the Republic of Bulgaria. So what was the relationship between the MPO and the newly established independent republic? It was officially former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. We called it Republic of Macedonia. So how the relationships were shaped?
Well, obviously, before Yugoslavia fell and before communism fell, in Yugoslavia and Bulgaria, the relationship was non-existent. It was antagonistic. But as the republic formed, as Bulgaria, moved away from communism, and in that convention in 1999, I mean, at the time, Georgievsky was the prime minister, I believe, of the republic, and it was an honor to have him there. Looking back on it, that's a pretty big moment, and it didn't happen that often, which is unfortunate. But I think right now we're making some headway. We're taking some steps. We can demonstrate that there is a lot of commonality. So I hope in the future that we can have representation. But on the other side of that, Bulgaria throughout the 90s and 2000s and today, it seems like there's always been a representative there. Currently, the consul general from Chicago, Svetoslav Stankov, he's been to every convention since he assumed that role. And he reached out to a lot of us. And through his efforts, that's probably why you and I are here today, because he introduced me to Professor Ivanov, which got this project started. So thank you, Svetoslav, for that. But Svetoslav is a welcome guest at our conventions. His predecessor from Chicago, Ivan Anchov, he was at several conventions. And then the consul general from New York also came to several conventions. This was back in the early 2000s. His name was, I've got it. His first name was Radoslav. I do not remember his last name. But, they had a presence, and they demonstrated the friendship that they had with the MPO. At a convention in Detroit in 2000, and I think it was 14 or 15, a former Bulgarian prime minister, and he was currently at that time, he was the ambassador to Italy. I'm going to pronounce his first name wrong. It's Marin Draiko.
Oh, yes, Marin Draiko. Yes.
Yeah, he addressed the delegates before the Saturday morning meeting started. And I was like, we had pictures taken together and this and that, and listening to him speak and talk about, the unique relationship Bulgaria has had with the MPO, and how it's amazing that this organization has been around for, at that time, almost 100 years. I think it was an honor to have him there. And I really hope that going forward, we can embrace these leaders, from Bulgaria, from, North Macedonia. And honestly, we share the same region. We've shared the same region. It would be awfully nice to see a representative from the Greek government there, acknowledging the fact, now they acknowledge that Macedonia exists, a different Macedonia than what growing up my interpretation of it was, but they acknowledge this existence of Macedonia. Why not send a representative to a convention? At some point in time, if Macedonia becomes a part of the European Union, they're going to be in the same group. They're going to be in the same union. They're going to be in the same regional and, the same organization, for crying out loud. And then also talking about the EU at a convention in Fort Wayne. I think it was our first convention after COVID. The Bulgarian delegate from the European Union, Andrei Kovachev, was there.
Oh, yes, Dr. Kovachev, right.
He addressed the delegates at the meeting. And in fact, I think he's been at several conventions. And when Fred Mianchev was president of the MPO, he invited Fred to be his guest in Brussels and to meet. And so, Fred was planning a trip to Europe. He had his niece was living in London at the time. So he just extended his trip, and he went to Brussels and met with the Bulgarian representative to the EU as the president of the MPO. So, the MPO, we look at the stories that I've told you, the pictures that exist from the early conventions, from the conventions I remember as a child, where there were just, to me, it seemed like thousands of people, just a lot of people, an entire ballroom at a big hotel in Cincinnati, packed with people. In fact, we were told at the 72 convention, you can't let anyone else into this room. There's too many people. It's going to be a fire hazard. I think there were 1,200 people at the dance. This was on Saturday night. Now, okay, we have 300 people at a dance. That's fantastic. When you think about an organization created by a small group of immigrants, and among those pictures that they display every year at the convention is that group of the first gathering that we've come to call the first MPO convention. Where my Dedo Corlo was one of the people there. That was in 1922. To what that evolved in, and the fact that it's still going, and the fact that we are carrying that legacy forward, and the fact that we still have that dream of a Macedonia, a Switzerland of the Balkans, or as William Gladstone said 150 years ago, I guess, if I'm doing my math right, Macedonia for the Macedonians. That's what we're still hoping for. That's what we still envision. But right now, it's just amazing that we're able to gather every Labor Day weekend and have this convention. And I can see friends that I've known for a long time, make new friends. I first met you at a convention, a few years ago here in Columbus. We've got a friendship now. And we may never be in the same space again. But because of the world we live in 2025, we're that close right now. Here we are. And we're sharing this moment that hopefully a lot of other people are going to enjoy. And there's my little Chupi, my granddaughters. That was so important to me to walk into that banquet carrying that flag and then to have those Chupi with me. And, the people are singing Iskere Zora, which, that was a big moment, very big moment at a convention. So
this is the fifth generation.
Emotional. I apologize.
No, it's great. We like it like this. We love your emotional attitude. This is your fifth generation, I think, of your family involved. Your grandparents, your parents, you, your daughters, and now your granddaughters.
Yeah.
Fifth generation in the Macedonian movement. It's
pretty amazing.
This is
pretty amazing.
Great family history. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was a moment at the convention in Fort Wayne, the most recent one. I think it was probably the first convention after COVID. And we're at the banquet, and the banquet always ends with the singing of Iskere Zora. And not everybody knows it. I don't know. I couldn't do the entire song from memory. Shame on me. But usually Lou Todorov and his wife and his children will get up there and sing it. And if there's anybody else who knows it and is willing to, they'll get up there. And, it's a big moment. Everybody stands. And so my mother was with us, and this turned out to be her last convention. All of a sudden, she's walking up there, and I'm like, oh, my God, Mom, where are you going? She goes, I'm going to sing too. And I'm like, no. And my wife, she grabs me. She goes, let her go. Well, my mother, she's up there with these people. They made room for her. And she trained as a young girl as an opera singer. So the woman could sing. She was good. But she was 90 years old at the time. Things were declining for her. And her memory wasn't what it used to be, obviously. Dementia was starting to set in. There were times she couldn't remember who I was, or my name, or she would refer to herself not as Nada Chachoff, as Nada Kolyanov. Anyway, here we are. They start singing. Nada overwhelmed the crowd. She was singing with all of her heart, with her voice, and I was like, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. And I'm thinking, this is a life in the MPO. This was a huge moment for her. Always will be a big moment for me. And turned out that was her last convention. Everybody in the room was just everybody was moved. And to this day, whenever people refer to my mother, they talk about that moment, those people that were there to experience it. Fortunately, I was holding my phone because it was 2021 and we have a way we can record history. So we've got that video forever. And it was a very proud moment. But I bring it up now because, you know, my grandchildren have seen that video, and that's going to have an impression on them. And at some moment in time, you know, they're going to be talking about that, like I'm talking about my memories now. And it's a good memory for them to have.
You know, it's a real pleasure to have these talks to you. It's a great experience for me, and I live with your emotions. It's really honor for me to have your memories here on the Corridor 8 podcast. I really believe that your grandchildren will grow up with the values, with the traditions of the MPO. And this is something good. It's something very good.
Right.
And what you said, it's probably the best way to finish this conversation, Mr. Chachoff. Sometimes I dream to talk to my Macedonian friends about the connections between the Thracians and the Macedonians, like the friendship of Goce Delchev and Pejo Javorov, and Vlado Chernozemski. He was born in North Thrace, and he died for Macedonia. In France, he killed the Yugoslav King Alexander, and the music and the text, the lyrics of Izgrei Zura is written by a Thracian Bulgarian from the city of Stara Zagora. Actually, there was a competition, I'm not sure how it is called, but probably competition ordered by Todor Alexandrov for composers to create the hymn, the anthem of the MPO, and Morfov wrote this song. So it's one of the many invisible connections that can unite people. If we look for the things that can connect us, we will find them.
Things are a lot closer than what we think.
Yes.
You know, and we share a lot of commonality. And that's important. That's important because, you know, all of us, regardless of who we are, every human has got some influences. And they've got some things that they've been exposed to in their lives, events that shape who they are and who they become. And I am so grateful for my Dedokordo, Babelena, Dedoristo, Babadana, for the things that they did to make my parents who they became. And I am so thankful that my parents did the things that they influenced my brothers and I with, so that here we are. You and I have got this opportunity to talk about this. And that's going to have a profound impact on my grandchildren and their children, hopefully. But I hope it also has an impact on a few of the people who may be taking the time to watch this, to let them look within themselves and realize who they are, where they came from, what was important to them, and what shaped them to be the people that they are. Because it happens to all of us. And I'm really proud to share that commonality with you, because you obviously have a lot of pride in who you are and where you came from, and you know what made you the person that you are. And that's something that everybody needs to hold on to and share as much as they can.
Let's greet our viewers with this amazing, great song. And that will be the finish of our talk today. It's okay.
Ajde, da živeje Makedonija.
Да живее Македония.